Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I am here to help you sleep better with true horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like my video. I would love to know where you are from and what time you're watching this video. So please leave a comment to let me know, and I will draw from that experience to tell even better stories. When you are ready, feel free to relax. This tale stands out as one of the eeriest accounts related to homelessness. My cousin, it's Code, entered the world on March 20th, 1988, in Mexico City. He was the firstborn of a couple who immigrated from Mexico, joining countless others in their pursuit of the American dream. Eventually, they found their home in a suburb of Orange County after spending the initial 12 years of their new life in this country. After much perseverance, their parents finally secured U.S. citizenship for themselves and their children a bit later that summer. In 2006, my cousin graduated from high school with a standard GPA. His classmates described him as a nice, respectful, and very kind boy, a demeanor that won him many friends during his school years. However, during that time, significant events occurred that profoundly impacted his personality. One of these was the attack on the Twin Towers in New York City in September 2001, which became one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in history. After this event, we all noticed an important change in him. His personality took on a darker, more melancholic tone as he developed a profound interest in politics, particularly aligning himself with the Republican Party and the foreign policy model advocated by then-President George W. Bush. During this period, my cousin also faced a relentless campaign of bullying from some classmates he referred to as a group of affluent kids who fancied themselves tough while roaming in packs. The connection between this incident and his evolving views remains unclear. Believe it or not, it is clear that after graduating high school, he had a definitive plan for his future, joining the U.S. Marines. In July 2006, he found himself stationed at Camp Pendleton in Oceanside, where he was assigned to the 15th Medical and Health Battalion. 2 years later, in 2008, he was deployed to Iraq with the 1st Supply Battalion. However, during his 8-month service there, he did not engage in any combat, as his role primarily involved transporting water and fuel to support soldiers on the battlefield. He undoubtedly encountered the myriad dangers associated with an act of insurgency, yet he was never directly under fire. However, we are aware that during his time in Iraq, there was an incident where my cousin aimed a loaded gun at an Allied soldier. While the specifics regarding the soldier's nationality and the reasons behind the altercation remain unclear, it is known that my cousin faced severe repercussions for his insubordination. He was demoted, stripped of his salary, and assigned additional work as a form of penance. His actions were unacceptable, yet despite this troubling incident, he still received all the necessary amenities upon returning from Iraq, along with the Iraq Campaign Medal, the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, and the National Defense Service Medal. Apparently, his superior viewed his outburst as an unfortunate but inevitable aspect of serving in a war zone. He was stressed, exhausted, and behaved poorly, but ultimately, he didn't harm anyone and accepted his circumstances. Facing punishment with a sense of stoicism holds considerable weight in the military. My cousin's minor act of defiance in Iraq, while notable, pales in comparison to the more severe incidents that would later define his life. His actions post-deployment may stem from a tragic occurrence that took place shortly after he returned home. Upon arriving at Camp Pendleton, he endured a significant traumatic brain injury when the latch on his tonneau malfunctioned, leading to a violent crash into the rear of his vehicle. Fortunately, just as the United States was plunging into a significant economic recession, one of the most severe in its history, during this challenging period, he struggled to find a decent job, a luxury that few could afford. Ultimately, he had to settle for a low-paying position as a landscaper, marking the beginning of a downward spiral of misfortune. Events unfolded that not only altered his trajectory, but also deeply affected his psyche as his life crumbled around him. My cousin learned that his father, my uncle, was battling a drug addiction, which led to his mother filing for divorce shortly after. Almost concurrently, They lost their family home due to his father's struggles. This was profoundly devastating for him and had a significant impact on his mental and emotional well-being, which had already been deteriorating since his return from Iraq around July 2010. Began to display symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which became apparent as he started to engage in what could be described as deviant behavior. His aggression escalated, and on several occasions, his girlfriend accused him of being violent towards her, prompting him to end the relationship. Additionally, he began to drink frequently, a habit he had not previously adopted. During this period, a crucial factor emerged that significantly impacted his mental health. This marked the tragic end of his closest companion in the army, a young man named Patin Ho, who lost his life in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, during combat in the summer of 2010. Following this devastating loss, Itzcoatl fell into a deep depression and grew increasingly reliant on alcohol, which hindered his ability to adjust to a normal life and secure stable employment for the next 2 years. He faced constant dismissals due to non-compliance or arriving at work intoxicated. His escalating addiction to alcohol left him ever more dependent on the income of. His mother and younger siblings were compelled to work to support the family. At this juncture, his physical and mental decline became painfully evident. Consequently, his mother and siblings encouraged him to seek psychological assistance, suspecting he might be undergoing some form of post-traumatic stress episode. However, he adamantly rejected the idea of psychiatric help, convinced that he did not qualify since he had never engaged in combat. By the end of 2011, his mental condition had worsened to the extent that he developed severe issues. Hypochondria had taken its toll, and he exhibited alarming signs of clinical delirium. Then, on October 25, 2011, after years of his life spiraling downward, something unimaginable occurred. My cousin unexpectedly showed up at the entrance of his former high school, hoping to see an old classmate named Herr Herrera, who was 24 years old. However, we didn't find him there. He made his way to Herr's home, where he lived with his mother and older brother. Yet, that day, he was absent from there as well, for better or worse, because that afternoon, in a chilling act devoid of explanation, Cole launched himself at his former partner's mother and brother, inflicting over 30 stab wounds that extinguished their lives in an instant. That afternoon, a few local neighbors witnessed Cole as he escaped the scene of the gruesome act, offering the police a description of his appearance and attire. Strangely, given the familial ties and animosity towards his partner, it is suspected that he had sought them out deliberately. On that day, the physical resemblance between them was striking. Yet it was he who found himself in the police's crosshairs as the primary suspect in the crime. This act of sheer negligence by the police force was evident, especially since he consistently denied any connection to the tragic deaths of his mother and brother, bolstered by a solid alibi. However, the mere fact that he had an argument with both relatives just days prior was sufficient for the authorities to take him into custody. Less than 2 months after this heinous act, he was remanded on the afternoon of December 21st. Cole was lingering in the parking lot of a shopping mall in the city when, without warning, he attacked a 53-year-old homeless man who had been residing in the area for several years. He inflicted over 30 stab wounds on the unfortunate man. The brutal act was captured on the mall's security cameras, prompting the police to release a composite sketch of the assailant in hopes of halting this new wave of violence. Yet just a week later, the situation escalated further, committed another murder even more heinous than the previous one. This time, the victim was a 42-year-old homeless man who spent most of his time under a bridge crossing the Santa Ana River in Anaheim. Similar to the case a week earlier, this man was found stabbed, but this time he was stabbed nearly 60 times, as if the attacker had entered a bloody frenzy during the assault on this helpless individual. A few days later, while the police were refining their efforts to identify the perpetrator and finally bring him to justice, before he continued to add to his list of victims, my cousin once again attacked a 57-year-old homeless man, stabbing him over 50 times and leaving his body in the parking lot of public library. In the aftermath of this horrific act, news of homeless deaths in Orange County quickly gained traction among local and national media. By early January 2012, several newspapers had published a series of articles investigating the murders, including one in the Los Angeles Times. A reporter conducted an interview with a 64-year-old Vietnam War veteran named John Barry, who expressed strong disapproval of the individual responsible for these atrocious acts. He cautioned potential victims to exercise utmost vigilance to avoid becoming the next target. However, unbeknownst to him, Barry's words would seal his fate. After viewing the veteran's interview on television, the perpetrator traveled to Anaheim and began to stalk John Barry. The following night, he located Barry, NEA. Cottle seemingly reached his breaking point and ultimately stabbed the 64-year-old veteran in front of numerous witnesses who observed the chaos in sheer panic and promptly called 911. This is how the police were able to apprehend him just as he attempted to dispose of his bloodied clothing only a few hundred meters from the crime scene. During the arrest, officers seized a 7-inch stainless steel blade that was still drenched in John Barry's blood, and later, homicide detectives found that the murders of the 3 other homeless men in the county were confirmed to involve the same weapon used in the brutal killings of his school friend's mother and brother. This revelation came after he embarked on a maniacal spree, spurred by the shocking cruelty of the new serial killer. The Orange County District Attorney announced his intention to pursue the death penalty at all costs during the upcoming trial. However, this sentence was ultimately executed long before the trial of my cousin took place. It's KOAT. Tampa was set to begin on January 17th, 2014, but on the night of November 27th, 2013, he somehow acquired a bottle of Ajax and consumed it entirely. The following day, he was discovered lifeless in his cell, having succumbed to chemical poisoning from the substance. His actions ultimately reflected a cowardly choice, a misguided attempt to preserve the dignity he had denied so many others during his brief yet chaotic journey through a life of crime. The irony of the situation lies in the fact that by the time his spree of murdering homeless individuals commenced, his own father, he found himself living on the streets, a victim of his own drug addiction. One morning, his father recounted to the press how his son had come to visit him, clutching several newspaper clippings detailing the murders of homeless individuals. With a sense of urgency, he warned his father to be cautious, as there was a maniac targeting people like them. Ultimately, the true nature of his cousin's horrific actions remained shrouded in ambiguity. Was it a psychotic break stemming from post-traumatic stress? Or was it simply a manifestation of an inherently evil, violent, and sadistic disposition? It was a part of him all along, and in that moment he chose to unleash his worst demons, taking 6 innocent lives. This is something we may never fully understand, but it undeniably marks the darkest chapter of my family's history and stands as one of the most chilling criminal cases in the annals of the United States. My name is Laura, and I am now 30 years old, happily married to a wonderful man with whom I share 2 children. We enjoy a comfortable life in a middle-class neighborhood, and I can't express enough how grateful I am for all that life has given me. It has shaped me profoundly, emerging from a background of hardship. I won't delve into the specifics of my childhood or the absence of family, but it's important to acknowledge the struggles I faced. Abandoned as an infant, I navigated a tumultuous existence, moving through a series of abusive foster homes. The most harrowing chapter unfolded when I was 15, a time spent on the streets, filled with a myriad of unsettling experiences. At times, I ponder the idea of chronicling the eerie encounters that marked that period of my life. Adolescence can be a tumultuous time, but nothing compares to the fear I felt during this experience. The most heartbreaking aspect was that it all stemmed from hunger. On that day, I was incredibly hungry, having gone 2 days without food. If my mind hadn't been clouded by that desperation, I might have processed the situation more clearly and understood what was unfolding. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I found myself wandering the streets, trying to gather a few dollars for something to eat. Homeless and hungry, every time the lights turned red, I would step out and display my sign, hoping for a few coins to land in the can of beans I held. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. On this particular night, generosity seemed scarce. It felt utterly hopeless, especially since just the day before, another girl on the street had taken what little money I had earned, leaving me unable to buy food. On this day, not a single penny had come my way. Just when all hope seemed lost, I noticed a guy approaching. Over, get out of the car and say to me, "Oh my God, honey, are you okay?" And I was like, "Oh my God, honey, are you okay?" The man seemed so kind, and I was feeling so weak and so hungry that this sudden act of aiming kindness, it was almost too much for me. So I'm holding back tears as I tell this Good Samaritan how hungry I am. And then he asks me if I want to come with him to get some food and offers to help. Me find a place to stay, all I could think about at that moment was food. I know I shouldn't have done it. I know I shouldn't have gotten into the car of a stranger. And after years of navigating life alone, I had learned not to place faith in anyone's goodwill. Yet, youth and naivety lingered, and hunger drove me to make a choice. I climbed into the vehicle with this man. When survival becomes your norm, confidence and calmness often elude you. Thus, you remain perpetually vigilant, scanning for potential exits should circumstances take a turn. As I sat in that car, my mind raced through various contingencies, formulating a plan in case things spiraled out of control. My primary strategy was to simply seize any moment of carelessness to escape and call for help. My backup plan in case he attempted to confine me was to execute a maneuver that another kid had shown me in one of the shelters. It was foolproof for breaking free from any hold and making a run for it. I even envisioned myself flinging open the door and tumbling out of the car if he tried to take me to some isolated spot, much like they do in the movies. Yet, as absurd as it may sound now, I actually felt a hint of safety. I found myself contemplating the notion of indulging in a burger, my mouth practically watering at the thought. When he inquired about where I wanted to eat, I promptly suggested Wendy's. However, I recall that we had just walked past one, and I pointed it out, only to be met with indifference. It was then that I sensed something amiss and began to question why he hadn't stopped at Wendy's. In that moment, the person who had previously seemed so kind began to remove his mask, revealing the true monster beneath. I asked him. As we drove, he remained silent, pressing down on the gas. In that moment, I understood without needing words, this was a trap. Instinct kicked in, and I shifted into survival mode, formulating an escape plan while keeping my composure. My strategy was simple. I would wait for him to halt at the first traffic light, seizing that opportunity to fling open the door and leap from the vehicle. We were still in the bustling heart of the city, surrounded by enough people to blend in. It was easy for me to seek assistance, and no one who was weary of those would pursue me, given the multitude of witnesses. He continued to move swiftly, quietly, his gaze locked on the road ahead. However, unlike before, his expression had shifted to one of deep seriousness, bordering on anger, creating such a stark contrast that he seemed almost like a different person. By that time, we found ourselves in the heart of the town, with traffic lights positioned every quarter mile. I chose to remain silent, biding my time until we reached the first light, at which point I opened the door and leaped from the car. Finally, I reached a red light. As the vehicle began to slow, I unlocked the passenger door and yanked the handle with all my strength. Nothing happened. I tried again, but still nothing. That's when I sensed something was off. The handle felt hollow, disconnected. I suppose that was the case, as it truly wasn't connected to anything. I can vividly recall that dreadful, sinking sensation in my stomach, far worse than mere hunger. Even now, when I think back to that moment, that feeling resurfaces, a stark reminder of the realization that hit me then. There was no escape. In that moment, I began to scream and pound on the car window, but he simply cranked up the stereo and sped through a red light, leaving me unable to signal for help. I can't quite recall everything that transpired, but in a frenzy, I leaned back in my seat and began to strike the windscreen with my bare feet. I kicked and kicked with all my strength, and then he erupted in threats, striking me with his right arm until the glass began to shatter. He was powerless to stop it, his eyes fixed on the road with only one arm free. He kept throwing punches. He managed to hurt me, but in that moment, I felt nothing. Adrenaline coursed through my veins. The only thing that mattered was my freedom to inflict serious damage on the windscreen of his car. As I saw it beginning to crack, his screams filled the air, declaring that I was dead, that he would ensure I beg him to end my life before he decided how to proceed. It was absolutely terrifying, yet I remained undeterred. We were not out of town yet, and I knew that if I broke the glass, everyone could see me and hear my cries for help. In that case, there was a good chance I would be rescued. As I delivered the final blow to the windscreen, a flurry of little shards began to fall everywhere. That's when I noticed the blue and red lights in the rearview mirror, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of an approaching police siren. I must say, there is only O, with a sense of grim satisfaction. I recalled the panicked expression of that unfortunate soul. He appeared as though he had encountered a specter, the color draining from his ghastly visage. No longer menacing, he seemed on the verge of losing control as he glanced into the rearview mirror. Despite the police closing in, I couldn't allow myself to feel safe. Instead, a fresh wave of anxiety settled within me, the dread of enduring a wild police pursuit looming large in my mind. I found myself in a precarious situation, caught in the chaos as someone armed sought to confront the police. Thankfully, the individual revealed his true nature. Fleeing like a coward the moment he was cornered, he leapt from the vehicle and dashed away, leaving the patrol car to halt behind us. As I witnessed an officer attempt to pursue him, panic surged within me, and I began to scream for help from inside the car. It was then that the officers approached, peering through the window and attempting to open the door, only to discover it was sealed tight. They approached the passenger's side, but ultimately circled around to the driver's side, finally managing to free me. I must admit, I have never felt such relief at the sight of law enforcement. The vehicle from which the man attempted to abduct me was revealed to be stolen, and that very night, they apprehended him and secured him in jail. Now, with my life back on track, I have developed a newfound apprehension at the sight of those familiar blue and red lights in my rearview mirror, as they often signal a speeding ticket or a mandatory driver's safety course. I confess I am not the finest driver in the world, yet in that instant, those lights symbolized my escape, the promise of emerging unscathed from what I believed would be my demise. The emotion I experienced when the officer extracted me from that vehicle is beyond words. It was a profound and overwhelming sense of relief. Their timely intervention allowed me to return to foster care, where, for the first time, I felt a sense of belonging. Shortly thereafter, I was placed with a family who embraced me, educated me, and made me feel for the first time in my life that I truly had a home. I can never express enough gratitude to those police officers for their actions that night. The highlight was finally getting my hamburger, which they kindly purchased for me. It truly couldn't have ended on a better note. I realize I probably shouldn't be discussing this, but I've held on to this secret for so many decades that I feel the need to share it. As I've aged and become more reflective, I find myself feeling close enough to the end that the consequences no longer weigh on me. Whether or not they find me, it was the early 90s. I was young and made a lot of mistakes. At one point, I ran out of money and fell into the street. Today, I consider myself a wise and experienced individual, but back then, I was pretty much a basket case. I had no experience living alone, let alone without a roof over my head. Not only that, but the city was much smaller all those years ago, making it much harder to find money. I spent all my time begging and pleading for someone charitable to give me a handout so I could eat, at least once a day. I found myself unable to gather enough change for even a hot dog at the convenience store, often going to bed with an empty stomach. During those times, I did everything possible to survive on the streets. I began begging for money on the bustling avenues, But most people were too preoccupied with their own lives to notice a homeless man in need. I then shifted to the residential areas, where I encountered more insults and disdainful glances than assistance. Yet, there were a few who came to my rescue with some food, but the reality is that after my initial months on the street, I found myself in a dire state, my bones protruding painfully from my skin, struggling to keep my eyes open due to sheer exhaustion. This stark situation highlights the indifference prevalent in our society, where many turn a blind eye, even when faced with someone in such evident distress. One chilly autumn day, as I sat on the sidewalk, shivering from the biting wind and rattling my cup in hopes of some kindness, a rude passerby in the suit yanked it from my grasp in one swift motion, sending my money scattering through the air, landing in the gutter. "Go get a job, you shameless bum," he sneered, his words dripping with disdain, before striding away. I fought to rise and gather my coins, but passers-by kept inadvertently kicking me, so I eventually surrendered. I turned my back on that harsh avenue and sought refuge on a quieter street, well aware that this particular stretch was frequented by the homeless. Ikumfas primepla. That would work. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw a couple of homeless people lying on a park bench, looking content, smiling, laughing, and chatting. I couldn't believe it. I was about to approach them to ask how they were doing when a guy came up to me and said, "Hey man, have you seen the newest episode of Demon Slayer?" I replied, "I can't watch it. I'm a bum." Laughter was something I hadn't experienced in a long time, and I certainly hadn't laughed since even before I became homeless. He was another homeless man, but he also seemed to be enjoying the moment, feeling quite undernourished. I finally mustered the courage to approach the couple seated on the bench. With my frail frame, I politely interrupted, saying, "Excuse me, I don't mean to intrude, but I'm facing a challenging time. I see you both seem well, and I'm curious. How have you managed to maintain your health? What do you do to ensure you have enough to eat?" To my astonishment, their response was a curt, "Get lost. Dude, please, winter is coming, and I haven't eaten in..." Weeks passed, and I felt I wouldn't endure much longer without food. All I saw from him was knowledge. I implored the man, and he finally relented, saying, "All right, I'll reveal how they've been feeding us, but you must swear to God that you won't disclose this to anyone. If you do, I assure you, hunger will be the least of your concerns. Do you agree?" In that moment, I would have willingly traded my soul for a hamburger, so naturally, I agreed to anything. Of course, I'll keep it a secret. I swear, I promised. By the Lord in heaven, God bless you and your lady. Thank you for that. I told him, feeling very grateful and eager to hear what his secret was. After this, the man said to me, "Listen, man, because I'm only going to say this once. Walk 2 blocks west of the edge of the woods. Across the street, there's a loose manhole cover. Go in and follow the manhole until you meet the old skinhead who feeds the homeless. Now get lost." Of course, I heeded him at once and ran out of there. My brain was so fried with hunger that when I found the sewer, a place I had never considered for its repulsive odor, loomed ahead, I made myself wait until sunset, understanding that the stealth demanded of me meant I should not be seen arriving in the early twilight. With a heavy heart, I lifted the manhole cover, feeling the last of my strength ebb away. I descended the ladder, dragging the cover back into place, enveloped by the musty darkness. As I climbed down, my feet sank into the sewage, and I didn't even flinch, let alone back up. If I had, I might have noticed what was wrong with the water in that sewer. Instead, I reached into my pocket and found a lighter. I lit it for some guidance in that dark place, and immediately that oppressive stench hit my nose again. I realized there were only 2 ways, forward and backward, as it was a tunnel. As I moved forward, I could see that on the wall of that tunnel, there was some writing suspiciously done with some kind of dripping red ink, or maybe it was blood. Yet, the word buffet was unmistakably visible, accompanied by an arrow directing forward. It seemed I had arrived at the correct location. As I pondered aloud, my voice reverberated through the expansive halls. awakening various creatures that resided within. Suddenly, the sounds of scurrying and squeaking filled the air. Rats, I presumed, hopefully retreating from my voice rather than approaching it. However, the reality was that I lacked the mental clarity to comprehend the seriousness of my predicament amidst all the chaos. The insatiable craving gnawed at my thoughts, propelling me forward relentlessly. I spotted more signs, vibrant and beckoning, guiding me towards the buffet. Yet, the sheer size of the rats caught my attention. Legendary tales of their monstrous proportions echoed in my mind, but that was a mere distraction. I must have slogged through the muck of the sewer for what felt like half a mile, driven by the sounds of feasting that reached my ears. It resembled a wild symphony of grunts and the sharp snap of teeth, an unprecedented cacophony of voracious consumption. The echo of the sewer reverberated, causing my stomach to churn. I quickened my pace, desperate to reach my destination, but fatigue soon overwhelmed me, forcing me to adopt a slow and steady rhythm. At last, I spotted an intersection in the tunnel, but just then, my lighter flickered and died. The sound of the banquet grew increasingly louder, and as I prepared to turn the corner, a sharp crack pierced the air, reminiscent of a bone snapping. I froze, a chill coursing down my spine, and I fought with every ounce of strength to resist the rising panic, to disturb the stagnant water, which I could now clearly see was a dark, murky red. As a light flickered from around the corner, I crept up to the intersection and cautiously peeked my head around that corner. It was then that I beheld a grim scene. Over the clogged drain of a sewer, 6 or 7 shirtless vagrants sat around the floating corpse of a man. They were consuming it ravenously, tearing the skin from the flesh from the bone, and then breaking the bones to suck out the marrow. I watched them crack the skull and pull out the brains, savoring that crimson hue while tendons caught between teeth. Most impressive, I would have recognized that cheap suit anywhere. I had seen that sucker just a few hours ago before those deranged cavemen killed him and dragged him out here. At that moment, my whole body filled with terror, so I turned and ran as fast as my battered body would allow. I may have been on the verge of starvation, but I would have rather died than become one of those cannibalistic beasts devoid of all humanity. Humanity. These individuals embodied the devastating impact that hunger can have on a person's psyche. After 3 decades of navigating life on the streets, I have mastered the art of survival in the most efficient manner. Trust me, I have witnessed countless events that could fill an entire volume with the horrors encountered in street life. Yet, I still find myself haunted by the memories of that particular day, a recurring nightmare that has lingered since that fateful afternoon over 30 years ago. Despite it all, I believe I have endured through the myriad of faces I have encountered. Recall that moment so I can finally free myself from this weight without the fear of becoming the target myself. Music. I'll begin this tale by admitting I was quite the troublemaker. And I'm not referring to the typical teenage defiance like sneaking cigarettes, accumulating detentions, or struggling with grades. I genuinely was a handful, particularly to those who mattered most to me. At 17, I found myself stealing cars and getting pulled over by the police for various offenses that didn't harm anyone. Yet, I was a relentless source of stress for my parents. After an incident where Dad and I after getting into a fist fight, I was kicked out of the house. I knew I deserved it. I ran out of places to turn to, but my pride kept me from going home and apologizing to Dad. It was summer, and I thought it would be wise to head to the park to find a spot to sleep. It was centrally located in town, so there were a group of other homeless individuals was already resting there. And as I came to terms with the fact that I was truly stranded for the night, I began to grasp the seriousness of their situation. This was no longer a mere experience. It was a harsh reality they faced daily. As the hours passed and darkness enveloped the park, I arrived around 11 p.m. It was around 1 a.m. As I settled onto the bench, one of the homeless men approached me. I confessed that I was homeless. He quickly clarified that wasn't what he meant, as it was clear I belonged on the street. He then remarked, based on my appearance, that he assumed I had a falling out with my parents. I didn't want to acknowledge the truth in his words, so I remained silent, but I recall him saying something profound. It's amusing to think about how, if you have family nearby, you should really take the time to see them. Trust me, you might not be prepared for the challenges life throws your way. My stubbornness kept me out there for 3 long nights, and each time I settled on that bench, the same homeless man would approach me, urging me to go home, insisting that this wasn't who I was. Looking back, he was undeniably right, but in that moment, I dismissed him as just another person who doubted me, convinced of my own toughness. Interestingly, my final night on the streets coincided with my first attempt to connect with others, with the homeless individuals resting in the park, driven by a mix of boredom and hunger. I found myself out of money and food. I thought that mingling with the others might yield some scraps or assistance. I inquired among them, but no one had anything to spare until I approached one man who brusquely told me to leave him alone. Yet, I couldn't help but notice a chocolate bar peeking from his coat pocket. My stomach growled with hunger, overpowering my better judgment, and with a nimbleness, I took the item from his pocket and hurried off. This was definitely not a highlight in my life. Taking food from someone in need when I could have simply swallowed my pride and walked home feels like one of the lowest points I've ever reached morally. But it happened. After that, I sought a place to conceal myself so I could indulge in the chocolate bar. Once I finished, I returned to where the others were gathered a couple of hours later, still attempting to fit in with them. The bums, but I still felt a wave of anxiety wash over me for obvious reasons. I thought the guy I took from was too inebriated to even notice, but I quickly realized how mistaken I was. A few hours after I indulged in what was likely his only food supply for the night, I saw him start to dig through his coat pocket, clearly aware that the chocolate bar was missing. I was trying to stay under the radar and maintain my composure, but I knew I had to keep a close watch on him. If he connected the D, find himself in a predicament. I can visualize the man striking his POET repeatedly before pausing. I can almost perceive the cogs turning in his alcohol-laden mind. Contemplating, I'm fairly certain I had a chocolate in there. Yet, moments later, he grasped his bottle once more and took a hearty swig, as if the thought had entirely slipped his mind. But it hadn't, and what followed was astonishing. He escalated from a standstill to a frenzy in an instant. The man took one drink, then two, then a third, followed by a much longer gulp, almost as if he was attempting to settle everything in record time. It became clear that this was precisely his intention. What had once been an innocent container of alcoholic beverages transformed into a deadly instrument when he abruptly turned to the man on his right and shattered the 40-ounce bottle against his face. The man crumpled to the ground, hands shielding his face as he stifled his screams and struggled to contain the blood. Meanwhile, the other man, the one I had robbed, began to kick him mercilessly. In the midst of the chaos, the man on the ground pleaded for assistance, yet no one responded, not even myself. I was acutely aware of my role in the assault that this unfortunate soul was enduring. My cowardice paralyzed me, preventing me from taking the moral high ground, as I feared I would soon find myself in his position, subjected to the same brutality. I recall feigning innocence, turning to the older gentleman who had always shown me kindness. I sought his guidance, asking what was happening, only to be met with his dismissive suggestion to go home, as if ignorance could shield me from the reality unfolding before us. Being on the ground, he was always the target of theft, so if anything went missing in the park, it was likely attributed to him. No one seemed to care, even as they continued to kick this man. Deep down, I felt a pang of guilt because I recognized his innocence. It was all my doing. Suddenly, the man I had robbed shifted his focus, abandoning the ribs to strike the one on the floor in the face, while the onlookers remained indifferent. It was a chilling sight, and I could almost hear the impact echoing off his features. Crushed beneath the weight of another's reckless abandon, I felt the urge to speak up, to reveal the truth that gnawed at my insides. Yet, fear gripped me like a vice, more potent than anything I had ever experienced. As I watched the violence unfold, my mind raced with the horrifying thought that if I dared to voice my fears, I too would face the wrath of that man, and it would be far worse than I could imagine. After all, I was the catalyst for this chaos, and who knew how many others might turn their anger towards me. The remnants of the night lay scattered around us, a stark reminder of the turmoil that had erupted. Being trampled, the homeless man repeatedly insisted he was not the thief. Then, another bystander turned to the kind old man and posed a question. What if he was telling the truth? What if someone else had committed the theft? The old man then glanced at me, his eyes wide with realization. In that instant, an overwhelming sense of guilt washed over me, as if a label had been affixed to my forehead, declaring my culpability. Just as I was about to speak, I hesitated. Confess, the old man squeezed my arm, leaned towards me, and said in a very low voice, "Don't say a word, boy. Just go. Get out of here and don't come back." I immediately heeded him, started walking away from the place, and as I walked away, I could still hear the guy getting beaten up, although I never found out what happened to this man after that. I can't imagine anyone surviving the kind of head injuries he received that very night, all because of me. Approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, I made my way back to my parents' house, knocking on the front door with a bag until my dad finally woke up and let me in. With my head down, I poured out a heartfelt apology for my foolishness and for not valuing what I had. I'm relieved to say that was the first step I took towards becoming a better person. Before that night, my actions rarely had consequences, but I realized how my decision to steal a simple chocolate bar could have led to an innocent man's suffering, and I understood that I see. Wine press. I understand that my words may come across as cynical, and I acknowledge my cowardice. I am filled with a mix of shame and horror as I reflect on how my pride and greed led me to act in a way that was deeply regrettable, while my fear could have endangered an innocent man's life. I wish that day had never occurred, and if I could rewind time, I would choose a different path. However, what is done, and the guilt from that day continues to haunt me. I struggle to articulate the overwhelming dread I felt each time I looked up and saw those faces. Little white flakes drifted down, signaling the onset of winter. The excitement among children and others was palpable, especially during the holidays. Yet, for those navigating the streets, snow signified something far grimmer: death and suffering. Today, I will recount a tale that is anything but pleasant. It is a chilling reality that unfolds annually on the streets. I often gathered scrap metal to exchange for cash at the recycling center, and frequently, I found myself lingering in a park close to that location, where I always encountered another homeless individual named Lupe. He was a few years older than me and stood out among the few I met, as he wasn't one of those who seemed completely lost. Often, many in similar situations struggle with addiction, which is a significant issue. Others find themselves on the streets due to mental health challenges or legal troubles. However, Lupe was different. He was the most grounded and composed person I had ever come across in that environment. I never learned the full story behind his circumstances. The narrative unfolded in a way that suggested a tragic tale, much like many others, yet he remained a genuinely good person. This marked my second year without a home. Winters here are harsh, with heavy snowfall. The previous year we endured cold, but only sleet, which, while unpleasant, kept the temperatures just above freezing. However, in this second year, we faced dry snow and plummeting temperatures, dipping to around 10 or even 20 degrees below zero. One day, I passed by the small cardboard shelter that Lupe used to assemble in a certain area. The alley during the winter, seeking refuge from the biting cold, but he was absent. His little niche lay empty, stirring a sense of worry within me. Days slipped by, and the weather grew harsher. I found solace in an abandoned building, surrounded by a collection of old blankets and cardboard. I pondered that perhaps, being more seasoned in the ways of the street, he might have sought a similar sanctuary. One day, I retraced my usual path through the discarded remnants of the city. Inevitably, my heart swelled with relief as I spotted a pile of sleeping bags and cardboard, a clear sign that he was home. I approached and gently lifted some of the cardboard, feeling a pang of guilt for waking him. Yet, joy surged within me at the sight of him. "Hey Lupe, we've got some terrible weather, huh? How about those Yankees?" I always greeted him this way, even when he was asleep, knowing he was a Mets fan. Typically, he'd emerge from his bag ready to tussle, but this time he remained still. It felt like a scene straight out of film. When I noticed his silence, a wave of fear washed over me. It was that unsettling sensation that creeps in when something feels off. I called out to him a few more times, but there was no response. Reluctantly, as if drawn towards an unavoidable truth, I leaned closer to where he should have been. I lifted the part of the sleeping bag that covered his head and was struck by the sight of his blue complexion. I didn't cry immediately. It was the first time I had encountered a body in such a state. I remember backing away, completely horrified, desperate to escape the scene. From him, I felt a sensation that teetered between agony and dread. When something like that befalls someone in a similar plight, especially one with far greater survival skills, the specter of death looms ever closer. Beyond the profound sadness and sense of loss, a stark awareness of my own fragility settled in. I walked a few blocks, my mind swirling, and when clarity finally returned, I managed to dial 911, directing them to the location of the body of this dear friend who was lost to us that night. Thankfully, I'm no longer without a home, and I prefer not to discuss my experiences on the streets with those unfamiliar with that chapter of my life. Yet, the memories of those I encountered linger, especially the many who succumbed to various fates. It is truly heart-wrenching to recall individuals like Lupe, those who triumphed over adversity and evaded the lures of the street, who seemed poised to escape at any moment. People who you know are just a phone call away. A call from a family member or a job interview can feel like a step towards the freedom and dignity of a life sheltered under a roof. Yet, that hope can be snatched away by something as senseless and absurd as the weather. It wasn't drugs or alcohol that claimed Lupe's life. No, he was murdered, not by an individual, but by the collective indifference of society, which now bears the blood on its hands. I hope your day is filled with health and joy. I invite you to subscribe to my channel to hear true horror stories. Hello, and see you again.